2008 through 2016 Chevrolet Cruze with the 1.4 liter engine, water pump, thermostat, and upper and lower radiator hose replacement. I'm Brian Esser from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the water pump, thermostat, and radiator hoses. So I'm going to be changing out the radiator hoses along with the water pump. If you're not changing out these hoses here on the driver's side and passenger side here, you don't have to follow on these particular steps. You can skip these steps. I wanted to share with you the thermostat. I highly recommend you change out the thermostat and the water pump that we're going to be using. I will link up all the parts and tools that I'm using in the description of the video. That way, if you need to pick any of those up, you can find them there. You're going to want to turn the wheel to the right and also jack up the front end, and we're going to take off these lower shields and the under shields here, and then the shields up here on the front. If you're changing the hoses, you have to take the shields off. If you're just changing the water pump, you may get away without actually taking any of these shields off, and you could do it all from up top. Make sure you use floor jacks and jack stands to support the front of the vehicle. Once you get that supported, now we can take these clips off. I'm using some panel popping tools to pop these clips out, and basically we work around the perimeter of these plastic shields here and pop all these little plastic clips off. There's also going to be a handful of screws you're going to run across when you're taking these off. It's not uncommon for these under shields to be damaged and held on with multiple styles of clips that people have replaced over the years. So you may want to consider having an assortment of panel popping tools in your collection, because you're going to run across this a lot when you're working on vehicles. The inner skirt here you need to peel back also. It's held on with a couple of T20 Torx bolts. So you're going to follow up the edge of the fender well here. And then once you get about 3 or 4 of these removed, then you can go ahead and peel the fender well back. And what I do is once I get the fasteners removed, the screws removed, then I peel the liner back, and I'll use a bungee cord, and I'll attach it to the corner of the inner fender lining here and peel it back, and that way it'll hold it out of the way. So I just link the bungee cord there, and I just hook it over here on the body, and that holds it back. Now I have access to get to the bolt, the tensioner, and all the bolts I need to get to the motor mounts and stuff that we're going to need to remove to get to the water pump. So there's a plastic shield that runs across the nose of the vehicle. We're going to go ahead and remove that, and we're going to remove the panel over here on the driver's side here. And the reason why is there's a hose just above all this that we need to get to. And if you're not doing the hoses, then you don't have to pull all these plastic panels off. We're also going to drain the radiator, so I got a bucket here to catch the coolant. Right here on the side of the radiator on the passenger side is the radiator petcock. You can go ahead and screw this loose, and that'll get the coolant draining. Now with an E14 female Torx socket, we're going to put it on the tensioner here and rotate it clockwise like this. And then we're going to take a center punch like this. And as you rotate it clockwise, there's a little hole right here that you're going to line up, and you're going to put the center punch in here. I'm sorry for my head getting in the way. And that'll hold the tensioner in the loosened position. Now you can slip the belt off and go ahead and remove it. And then when you're ready to go back on, you just give it a little tension with the with your ratchet and pull the pin out, and that'll release the tension, so you'll tighten the belt back up. Now we need to work on loosening up the lower motor mount bolts here. We're not going to take them out just yet. We're just going to loosen them up. So there's one in the center here, then there's going to be the one to the right, and then there'll be a one on the far left. So now most of the coolant should be drained out, so you can go ahead and close the petcock off. Just run it in until it's snug. You don't want to over tighten it. It's made out of plastic, so just snug it up. So now I'm going to lower the vehicle back down to the ground. I'm going to use a floor jack and a block of wood. I'm going to put the floor jack underneath the oil pan here and lightly jack up onto the oil pan using the block of wood that spreads the load out so you don't crack the oil pan or anything. We're just supporting the engine. Now we're going to work on getting the air cleaner out. So we're going to loosen up the clamps here. So we're going to get this boot off by loosening up the clamp and pulling it off the snorkel here. You also need to unplug the mass airflow sensor. So you're going to slide this little red tab backwards, and then you can squeeze the tab right here in the middle and unplug it. The wire loom will be clipped onto the side of the air box here. You want to pull this off. Now you can take this wire and just tuck it off to the side. Now we're going to unbolt the lid to the airbox. It's held on Phillips screws. I'm using a little screw gun here. You can use a regular Phillips screwdriver, but these make it much quicker. I will link up all the tools that I'm using in the description of the video, especially the ones I think will help you the most. So you're going to work your way around the perimeter of the air box, removing the Phillips screws. Once you get the last screw removed, you can go ahead and just lift the whole box up and hose it off and set it aside. Now we need to get the lower portion of the box out. We're going to start by removing the air filter. On the front of the lower air box, there's going to be a vent hose. We're going to pull this off like this. Now we can take this bottom portion and just lift straight up. It's just held on with rubber grommets. So we have the jack underneath the engine supporting it. So now we're going to go ahead and remove the engine mount here. There are 15mm bolts here. We're just going to remove all these fasteners. The tool you see me using here is the Stubby Impact by Milwaukee Tools. It's perfect for this type of job. Once you get the 6 fasteners removed, you're just going to lift the mount straight up and set it aside. Now that you got the engine mount removed, we're going to slowly jack the engine up a few pumps and raise it up about an inch or two just to get a little bit more access to the water pump here. So now you can go ahead and finish removing the belt here and getting it out of your way. Just tuck it off to the side. If you're replacing it, go ahead and remove it completely. If it's still in good shape, you just tuck it off to the side and we'll reuse it later. Now we're going to take off the lower portion of the motor mount that's blocking the water pump here. We're going to remove the 2 fasteners holding it on. They're 15mm. So now we're going to finish unbolting the motor mount that we loosened up from underneath, the 3 bolts that we loosened up. So go ahead and finish removing these fasteners. Then you can go ahead and take the mount out. The bolts are not going to come out with it. They're going to stay in the bracket when you pull it out. You want to keep them all together. And now you can set this aside. Now with an E12 female torque socket, we're going to remove the 3 fasteners holding the water pump pulley on. Now we're going to unplug the coolant temp sensor from the thermostat here and then take the hose off. You're going to squeeze the tab here and pull the electric connector straight up. Once you get the tab on the coolant temp sensor pressed, you're going to lift it straight up. And then after that, you're just going to push it off to the side, the connector out of your way. So you're just going to push it out of the way. Now to get the hose off, we're going to need a hook tool and we're going to pull this clip upwards and pull it off. Now you should be able to wiggle the hose back and forth, the side to side, and pull, and it should pop off, and then you can just tuck it out of your way for right now. Now just above the alternator, there's a hose we need to remove. I'm using a pair of squeeze clamp pliers. Just regular pliers will work if you don't have these. You want to squeeze the little tab here, or the clamp, and slide it back. Once we get it slid back, then we can work the hose and pull the hose off. To help get the hose off the port here, I'm using a pick tool and putting it underneath the lip of the hose here and working the hose free, so just working the pick inside the hose. Now you should be able to pull it straight off. Now you're going to want to unplug the front cam sensor here by squeezing the tab and pulling the connector off, and you're just going to tuck the wire out of your way. So now we're going to unbolt the water pump, and I'm using an E10 female torque socket here and my Stubby Impact to get in here and make quick work of this. So we're just going to go around the perimeter of the water pump and remove the fasteners. So I believe there's going to be 6 of these fasteners in total. If you notice, I left them in the pump. I just loosened them up. And the reason why I did that is all the bolts are different lengths, and I left them in there so I can keep track of them. We're going to leave the thermostat hooked up to the water pump here. Reason why is we're going to finish unbolting the water pump, and we're going to pull it back and get to this hose here. Getting this hose on and off is a little bit of a challenge, and I'm going to show you how I did it. So to keep track of all these bolts, once they were unbolted, I went ahead and transferred it from the old pump, and I wiped them off, and then I slid them into the new pump in the position where I took them off of. So like I was saying, they're different lengths, so you want to keep track of which bolt goes to where. So this is probably one of the easiest ways to do that. A second ago I said there was 6 fasteners. I believe there's quite a few more. So I just went around the perimeter of the pump using the new pump as a guide to figure out where the bolts are, and went ahead and pulled those out and transferred them over to the new pump. Now with a pry bar right next to the thermostat housing here, I gave it a little pry, and that popped it free. Now with the water pump unbolted and pulled outwards, we can see the hose back here and get to it a little easier. So we're going to squeeze that clamp and pull the hose off. Having these hose clamp pliers make it easy. They have little grooves in the tip of it that fit into the hose clamps. Makes it easy to slide them back. Once you get the clamp slid back, then you can use a pick tool and pick around the hose here, being careful not to poke a hole in the hose, and push it off. Now the water pump and thermostat is free. Now with a razor blade, I'm going around the perimeter of the mounting surface where the water pump is and cleaned off any excess gasket material and silicone that may have been in there. So you want to take your time and scrape off any excess of the gasket material. If you leave any of that on there, the new one will not seal right, so go ahead and scrape that off. After peeling off all the excess gasket material, I use a little bit of parts cleaner and spray it on a rag here, and then give the whole mating surface a wipe down and dry everything off. So now I'm going to work on getting the rest of the hose off. You're going to need that pick tool, and there's going to be a clip just like there was on the top portion of the hose. We're going to reach down here and pull the clip off and pull the hose off. It just takes a little bit of patience to get to the little clip down here and pull it off. Once you get the clip removed, now you can just wiggle the hose side to side and pull, and the hose should pop right off. So I matched up the hose with the old hose, and then what I'm going to do is make sure that the clips are pushed down, and then I'm going to put a little bit of silicone-based grease on the O-ring on the inside of the hose here, and this will help the hose slide onto the radiator neck and also onto the thermostat when we go to do this. So put a little bit of that grease. Now I put it down into position. I line up the little tabs on the hose here, and I press it in until you hear that clip spread open and then clip back down. You'll hear a little audible click. Now you're going to give it a little pull to make sure it doesn't pop back off. Now we can go ahead and put our new thermostat onto our new water pump. We need to steal the bolts from the old one here and then transfer those over to the new one. Now I got the new thermostat mounted to the new water pump. I put the bolts in, I ran them in until they're snug and about a quarter turn more. So if you remember earlier, we put the bolts in the new water pump to keep track of which ones goes. So now what I'm going to do is going to transfer those back over to the old pump just to keep track of it while I put the water pump into position and start the lower hose on the thermostat housing. So now I'm going to take the water pump and thermostat and feed it down here. And I'm going to start the smaller hose and put the clamp on. Once you get the hose on the port, then you can go ahead and pull the squeeze clamp up into position. If that's in bad shape or you feel like it's weakened in any way, shape, or form, change it out with a new one or with a worm type clamp. So now I'm going to put the new gasket onto the water pump. What I do is I take one of the bolts from the water pump and slide it through, and then I slide the gasket over the bolt. And you may want to do a couple bolts if you need to, and start them through, and then that'll hold the gasket into position. I don't use any silicone or any glues or anything like that. I just put the gasket on dry. Now you can lift the water pump and gasket into position and start the bolts. You want to start all these bolts by hand. So I don't tighten down any of the bolts until I'm sure all of them are started and going through the gasket and the gasket's lined up. So just take your time sliding the water pump out towards you so you can see the gasket a little bit. Make sure that the bolts slide through it and start all the bolts by hand. So I'm just pulling the bolts from the old water pump out and transferring them straight over to the new one, and this keeps track of all the bolts. So the short ones go with the short holes and the long ones go in the long holes, and you don't have to try to figure out where all that stuff went. Now with my M12 cordless ratchet here from Milwaukee Tools, I ran all these fasteners in until they were snug. So I slowly use the variable trigger and slowly run the bolts in until they're snug. And I do this in a crisscross pattern, kind of like a star pattern, like you're doing a tire or lug nuts. So you'll just work your way back and forth until all the fasteners are drawn in, just until they're snug, and then we'll go over it with a torque wrench. Now that we got them all run in until they're snug, now we're going to torque them down. So I'm using my torque wrench here. I got it set at 71 inch-pounds or about 6 foot-pounds. And we're going to torque these down all in a crisscross pattern or star pattern, like I said, just like you would if you were torquing a wheel down. So back and forth, back and forth. When you're torquing them down, you don't want to jerk the torque wrench. That'll give you a premature torque or an artificial torque. So you want to ease the torque up slowly until it clicks, and that's the best way to do it. After the water pump is torqued down, you can go ahead and plug in the cam sensor here and then plug in the coolant temp sensor here on the thermostat. Now you can clip the hose onto the thermostat housing. So you're going to line it up with the little groove on the housing and on the hose, and then you're just going to press it in until you hear that clip down into its position. You want to give it a little tug and make sure that this hose is not going to pop back off on the top and the bottom here. After securing the hose, now we're on the opposite side, just above the alternator. We're going to re-secure the hose here, slide it on, and start the clamp. Now we can go ahead and install the pulley. So we're going to put a little bit of blue thread locker on the 3 bolts that hold the pulley on. This will help prevent these bolts from vibrating loose and coming back off. So we're going to start all 3 of the bolts by hand. And then once we got them started by hand, then we'll run the fasteners in until they're snug, and then we'll torque them down. I just used my cordless stubby impact here to run the fasteners in until they were snug. I didn't hammer down on them, just ran them in lightly until they just barely touched. Now using my Sheckley universal tool here to hold the pulley still, I torqued all 3 of these fasteners down to 16 foot-pounds. So what you do is you take the tool here and you wedge it against the bolt like this and wedge it against the opposite bolt. Now it'll hold the pulley in place while you torque it down. Now with the pulley torqued down, we're going to go ahead and slip the belt back on. So reach down here and go ahead and pull the belt back over all the pulleys. If you remember right at the beginning of the video, we pulled the tension over and put a pin in it, and that's holding it in position. So it's holding it into the loose position so we can slip the belt on. Now once we got the belt on, we're going to take our wrench here and torque it clockwise just a little bit, and then we're going to pull this pin out, which is just a dowel pin right here. So I'll just pull that out, and that'll release the tension. Now you can release the ratchet, and now the belt is tight. Now we're going to replace the motor mount bolts. These are what they call torque to yield bolts, and we're going to reinstall those. Now I was able to get 3 of the bolts, but 3 of the bolts I was unable to get due to the General Motors being on strike. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the bolts that we can on and move forward. So we're going to take these 3 bolts and replace the mount here. So you have to take the bolts and slide them through the bracket like this, and then feed it down into position. And once you got it down into position, you can start all 3 of these bolts by hand. Once I got all the bolts started by hand, then I switched over to my ratchet here and just ran them in until they're snug. So I use the variable trigger, so I ease off the trigger as it gets close to being bottomed out. Now that you got the bolts snug, we're going to switch over to a torque wrench, and we're going to torque them down to 45 foot-pounds, and then it requires a 60-degree angle of rotation of tightening. That's where they're called torque to yield. So you torque them down to a certain spec, and then you turn them an additional turn of 60 degrees. And if we were to reuse these bolts, most likely they would snap off. So you want to torque them down to 45 foot-pounds. So now we need to turn these 3 fasteners down 60 degrees. To do that, I'm going to use my little digital angle device here that clips onto any ratchet. So we can program this device to the angle that we want, clip it onto our ratchet, and then we can rotate it and it'll keep track of the angle that we've gone. So I set this up at 40 degrees of angle, and the reason why I didn't go to the full 60 is because I'm reusing these 3 bolts. These are the 3 I had to reuse because they're on strike and I could not get these bolts. I recommend you replace them though. So now I'm going to run it over to 40 degrees angle using the tool here to help guide me there. So after torquing these 3 bolts down, now I'm going to put the top portion of the mount into position, and these 2 bolts here I could not get either, but the 3 bolts here in the back here I was able to buy from the dealer. So these are all torque to yield bolts as well. So I started these fasteners by hand. You're also going to use the floor jack to either jack the engine up or down, either raise it up or lower it down to make it as level as you can when we start these bolts here. So these are the bolts that I was able to buy, and we're going to go ahead and start all 3 of these bolts by hand. And then we're going to run, once we get them all started by hand, then we're going to run them all the way down until they're snug, all of the bolts. So these bolts are torqued to yield as well. We're going to go ahead and torque these down to 46 foot-pounds. That's the spec for it. So the 3 bolts in the back are torqued down to 37 foot-pounds. So we'll torque all 3 of these down. So now we're going to torque the 3 in the back that we replaced with new ones. I'm calibrating the angle tool here, and I'm going to clip it to my ratchet. And then we're going to torque those down or rotate those 60 degrees. So once we got our ratchet set up, we take the tool here and clip it to our ratchet. It's a magnetic hold here. And then we zero it out. And now we're going to rotate it to 60 degrees. So we'll keep rotating to 60 degrees. And the way it works is it's designed to, even if you ratchet it backwards, it's supposed to keep track of where you last left off. So I'm going to rotate it to 60 degrees, and I'm going to do all 3 of the fasteners like that. Now that the engine mount's torqued down, we're going to go ahead and put the lower airbox portion back in. These rubber grommets have to fit into these little grooves down here, so you want to line these up. So once you got the rubber grommets lined up with the little slots here on the left and right side, you just press it down until it locks into position. Now you can go ahead and install the air filter, and then you can go ahead and put the top portion of the air box on, and you're going to start all the fasteners around the perimeter of the air box. So go ahead and tighten those all down. Now you're going to want to plug the mass airflow sensor in. You want to push it in until it's secure and push the lock tab down. Now you can go ahead and put the air snorkel on and tighten up the clamp. Now on the opposite side of the engine, we're going to change this hose out here. So this hose has been, clamp has been changed, but the hose is original. So it may have a squeeze clamp or a worm gear. Go ahead and take the hose clamp off there. If it has the squeeze clamps, you're probably going to have to use a cable style hose clamp tool like this to get on the clamps on the top and bottom there. The one on the bottom down there is pretty difficult to get to. You have to go from different angles to get on the clamp. It was a tough chore down there to get on those clamps. So I use the squeeze clamp here, fed it down there. I even tried from underneath the vehicle. That's why I took all those shields off from below. So whatever works for you, depending on how the clamp is positioned, you'll either have to take it off from the bottom or you'll have to try to take it off from the top. This is one I had to fool around and mess with it for quite some time. It was probably the hardest part of the entire job. So I did not have any luck getting the hose clamp off from up top. So what I did was I lifted the vehicle up and crawled back underneath. Here's the wheel here. Here's the flat inner fender well. Right next to the frame here, I peeled it back and I would reach in here. And now I can see the clamp and get to the clamp here. So now I'm going to use my squeeze clamp tool to get in here and squeeze the clamp and pull the hose off. So like I said, I tried a lot of different angles and a lot of different tools to get it off. Eventually what worked for me was reaching over the top of the frame like this with one hand and then getting my pliers on there. So you'll see me do it here. So I reach around the frame here and onto the radiator with the pliers. And then once I get the pliers on there, I was able to reach around the frame on the opposite side with my hand here and pull the hose off. So now that I got the hose off the bottom, I went ahead and went back on top of the car looking downwards towards the bottom. There's a little clip that's holding the radiator hose in place. Pop that free, and now I was able to pull the hose out completely like this. Now we're just going to feed the new one down here. I'm going to put a worm style clamp on it here, and we'll figure out the best angle to get the hose clamp on there, and we'll tighten that up on the bottom. And we'll put the hose on the air snow on the port here on the top with the new clamp and tighten that up as well. So the top portion of it was easy. I slid it on, put the clamp into position, and went ahead and tightened this down. Now I was able to take a new clamp here and reach down there and put it on the radiator hose and position it in the perfect position. So I reached down there, put it on the hose, and slid the hose over the radiator on the bottom here just by reaching down and doing it. And then with a long extension and an 8mm socket, I was able to reach down here, hold the clamp into position, and then go ahead and tighten up the clamp using the extension and a ratchet. Now that the hose clamps and hoses are all changed out, we can go ahead and put the lower shields back into position. So you'll do the left and right side. You'll just line up the shields with the original holes and clips. Go ahead and put the clips in, and then if it had a screw or fastener, go ahead and screw that in. So you're going to do both left, right, and the center portion of the shields here. So once we get all the shields, left, right, the center, and the inner fender wells all re-secured, then we're going to lower the vehicle back down and fill it up with coolant. Now with all the shields reattached, we got the vehicle back down on the ground. We're going to fill it up with 50-50 mixed Dex Cool. We go ahead and buy it already mixed. If you're going to mix it yourself, you need to use distilled water. the decks cool and mix it 50-50. Now we can go ahead and start the vehicle. You want to put the heater on high, put the blower on the lowest position. So start the vehicle up, put the blower or the heat on high, and the fan blower on low. You want to make sure that the AC is not engaged or the defroster is not turned on. So we're going to run this vehicle until we feel hot air come out of the vents, also until the thermostat opens up here. And then when the thermostat opens up, the coolant level may drop. There's a mark on the bottle. We're going to fill it up to that mark on the bottle. And we're also going to listen for the cooling fans to run and operate. So it may take 10 or 15 minutes of running the vehicle for the fans to run, the coolant level to drop, the thermostat to drop. If it's over full when the thermostat opens up, then you're just going to suck a little bit out. You can use a turkey baster to do that. So I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. That way, if you need to pick any of those up, you can find those links there. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.